In this episode, we're going to focus on something that sounds like organizational housekeeping, but is actually one of the strongest predictors of whether a governance and compliance program succeeds or quietly collapses: clear ownership. The Certified in Governance, Risk, and Compliance (CGRC) mindset assumes that good intentions are not enough, because controls, evidence, and reviews do not happen reliably unless specific people or teams are accountable for making them happen. Beginners sometimes imagine compliance as a set of rules that exist on their own, but compliance is a set of activities performed by humans across the organization. If nobody owns a requirement, it becomes an orphan that only gets attention when an audit is imminent, which is why so many programs feel like constant emergency drills. Clear roles and responsibilities turn compliance into a routine operation because everyone knows who decides, who executes, who verifies, and who documents. Ownership also prevents hidden gaps, where each group assumes another group is handling a task, and the task simply never occurs. Our goal is to make role assignment feel practical and natural, so you can recognize how mature programs prevent confusion and make compliance sustainable. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A role is a defined set of responsibilities and authority, not just a job title, and this distinction matters because job titles vary widely across organizations. In governance work, you care less about what someone is called and more about what they are accountable for and what decisions they are allowed to make. For example, a system owner might be responsible for ensuring controls operate in a specific system, while a data owner might be responsible for defining how data in that system must be protected and used. Compliance functions might be responsible for interpreting requirements and coordinating evidence, while security functions might be responsible for providing control guidance and assurance. Beginners often assume one team, usually security, owns everything. But mature governance spreads responsibility to the people closest to the systems and processes while keeping oversight centralized enough to maintain consistency. The reason this matters is that compliance tasks exist across the full life cycle of systems and data, and one team cannot realistically execute every task without becoming a bottleneck. Clear role definitions prevent bottlenecks because they distribute work intelligently while keeping accountability visible. When roles are well designed, the program becomes more resilient because it does not depend on a single person to keep it alive. Ownership is the idea that for every compliance activity, someone is responsible for ensuring it happens, is done correctly, and is supported by evidence. This does not mean ownership equals doing all the work personally, because owners often delegate tasks, but they remain accountable for the outcome. A classic compliance failure is the shared responsibility trap, where a task is assigned to a group rather than an owner, and then nobody feels personally accountable. Another classic failure is the invisible work trap, where compliance tasks are assumed to occur as part of normal operations but are never explicitly assigned or verified. Ownership solves both by making accountability explicit and by creating a path for escalation when tasks are not completed. Beginners sometimes worry that ownership feels harsh, but it can be supportive because it reduces uncertainty and finger-pointing. When a task is clearly owned, people know who to ask for clarification, who can approve exceptions, and who will be responsible for maintaining the process over time. In CGRC thinking, ownership is a form of integrity because it ensures the organization can stand behind its claims with accountable decision-makers. To assign roles effectively, it helps to understand the typical categories of compliance activities that must be owned. One category is requirement interpretation, which is the work of understanding what a law, contract, or standard actually demands in the context of the organization. Another category is control design, which is deciding what controls will meet the requirement and how those controls will operate. Another category is control operation, which is the routine execution of tasks like reviews, approvals, monitoring, and incident handling. Another category is evidence management, which is collecting, organizing, and maintaining proof that controls operate. Another category is assurance, which includes testing, auditing, or evaluating whether controls are effective rather than just present. Finally, there is exception management, which is handling cases where compliance cannot be fully met temporarily and ensuring compensating controls and approvals exist. Beginners often focus only on operating controls, like doing reviews, but programs fail just as often because interpretation was wrong, evidence was chaotic, or exceptions were unmanaged. Assigning roles across these activity categories creates a complete program rather than a partial one. When you can see these categories, you can map responsibilities more clearly and avoid leaving critical tasks unowned. Let's start with the system owner role because it is a common anchor point in governance programs. A system owner is typically accountable for the system's overall operation, including ensuring that required controls are implemented and functioning. This role matters because many compliance requirements apply at the system level, such as access control, logging, change management, and incident response readiness. The system owner may not personally administer the system, but they are responsible for making sure the right people do and for ensuring the system meets governance expectations. A beginner misunderstanding is thinking the system owner is purely technical. But the system owner's governance responsibility includes coordinating with compliance and security functions to ensure requirements are understood and met. This is also a role that often approves risk decisions or exceptions related to the system within the bounds of organizational policy. The system owner must understand system boundaries and dependencies because controls often rely on shared services and vendor components. When a system owner role is clear, the program has a natural place to anchor accountability for system-specific controls and evidence. Without a system owner, compliance tasks tend to drift and become reactive. The data owner role is another critical role, especially when privacy and regulated data are involved. A data owner is accountable for defining how a specific category of data must be handled, including classification, access expectations, sharing rules, retention periods, and disposal requirements. This role matters because data obligations often follow the data wherever it goes, even across systems and teams. Beginners sometimes assume the system owner automatically owns the data, but in mature governance, the data owner and system owner may be different because data can live in multiple systems. The data owner helps ensure consistency in how data is protected and used, which is essential for privacy governance and for avoiding hidden scope. Data owners also often approve access to sensitive datasets because they understand the business purpose and can evaluate whether access aligns with that purpose. They may also be involved in approving data sharing with third parties and defining acceptable uses. When data ownership is unclear, data tends to proliferate without control, and privacy obligations become difficult to manage. Clear data ownership makes compliance activities like marking, handling, and retention enforceable and auditable. Compliance functions play a unique role because they often act as interpreters and coordinators rather than as operators of every control. Their responsibilities often include tracking applicable requirements, translating requirements into control expectations, maintaining mappings between requirements and controls, and coordinating evidence for audits and assessments. They may also help design compliance cadence, ensuring reviews and activities occur on schedule. Beginners sometimes imagine compliance as the people who say no, but mature compliance functions are program enablers because they reduce ambiguity and help teams understand what is required. They also protect integrity by ensuring the organization's documented commitments match operational reality. Compliance teams often manage the relationship with auditors and assessors, which means they need reliable inputs from system owners, data owners, and security teams. Another important compliance responsibility is to maintain a clear process for handling findings and remediation, because audits often identify gaps that must be tracked to completion. When compliance functions are clearly defined, the organization avoids the scramble of assembling evidence at the last minute. Clear compliance roles help transform compliance from an event into an operating discipline. Security functions often provide subject matter expertise, guidance on control selection, and assurance activities that validate control effectiveness. In governance terms, security teams may define baseline control expectations, provide risk assessment support, and design monitoring and incident response practices. They may also conduct testing or coordinate assessments that produce assurance evidence. Beginners sometimes think security owns compliance, but mature programs treat security as a partner that supports compliance by ensuring controls are effective and risk decisions are informed. Security also plays a key role in interpreting security implications of requirements, especially when requirements are broad and must be translated into practical safeguards. Security teams may also support training and awareness efforts, which are administrative controls that help people follow policies consistently. Another important role for security is supporting exception decisions by evaluating risk and recommending compensating controls. When security roles are clear, they help prevent both under-control and over-control because they apply expertise to design controls that reduce risk without making work impossible. Clear security roles also help ensure evidence is meaningful because evidence should reflect effective controls, not just checkboxes. Privacy responsibilities often intersect with both compliance and security, but deserve their own clarity, because privacy is not simply a subset of security. Privacy-focused roles often define acceptable data use, handle privacy risk assessments, coordinate responses to privacy-related requests, and ensure transparency and purpose limitation are respected. These roles also help ensure that security controls, such as logging and monitoring, do not create unnecessary privacy risk by collecting or exposing personal data beyond what is needed. Beginners sometimes assume privacy is handled automatically if confidentiality is strong, but privacy requires governance decisions about collection, use, sharing, and retention, which means privacy responsibilities must be assigned. Privacy roles also often coordinate with legal or policy functions to ensure obligations are interpreted correctly and communicated clearly. They may also oversee training and policies related to personal data handling, and they may be involved in reviewing vendor relationships that involve personal data processing. When privacy roles are explicit, the organization is less likely to violate expectations through unintended data reuse or excessive retention. Clear privacy ownership supports trust because it ensures someone is accountable for respecting individuals in practical ways. Operational roles, such as administrators, analysts, and service owners, often execute the day-to-day tasks that make controls real. These roles may manage access provisioning, perform log reviews, handle incidents, execute backups and recovery tests, and maintain configurations. Governance programs often fail when they assign responsibilities only at the high level, like system owners and compliance coordinators, but do not define who actually performs recurring tasks. Beginners sometimes assume tasks will happen because they are written in a policy, but policies do not create calendar events or complete reviews. People do. A mature program therefore defines operational responsibility clearly and ensures those roles have the time and training to perform tasks consistently. Operational roles also need clear escalation paths because they will encounter exceptions, unusual events, and conflicts that require decision authority. If escalation is unclear, tasks stall and controls degrade. Operational roles also generate much of the evidence that supports compliance because logs of actions, tickets, approvals, and review records are created through operational work. When operational responsibilities are clear, evidence becomes a byproduct of normal operations rather than a special project. Another important role concept is the difference between accountability and responsibility, because mixing them creates confusion. Responsibility is about doing the work, while accountability is about owning the outcome and answering for it. One person can be accountable while several people are responsible, and that is often necessary in compliance programs. For example, a system owner might be accountable for access reviews, while administrators are responsible for producing access lists and implementing changes, and compliance teams coordinate evidence. Beginners often try to assign everything to one person to avoid confusion, but that creates bottlenecks and can be unrealistic. The better approach is to assign accountability clearly and then define supporting responsibilities so tasks can be executed efficiently. This also makes it easier to measure performance, because you can see whether tasks are completed and who owns completion. A mature program also defines who must be consulted and who must be informed, because compliance activities often affect multiple stakeholders. Clear role relationships reduce conflict because people know how they are expected to participate. In CG/C work, clarity beats heroics, and role clarity is one of the strongest forms of clarity available. Exception handling is a special area where role clarity is essential because exceptions are where programs often lose integrity. An exception is a documented decision to deviate from a requirement or control expectation, usually temporarily, with justification and compensating controls when appropriate. Exceptions require approval by someone with the authority to accept the risk, and that authority must be defined. If exceptions can be approved by anyone, the program becomes meaningless because requirements become optional. If exceptions cannot be approved at all, the program becomes unrealistic, and people create hidden workarounds instead. A mature program defines who can approve exceptions at different risk levels, who evaluates the risk, who implements compensating controls, and who tracks expiration and review. This creates a balanced approach that respects operational reality while maintaining governance integrity. Exceptions also require evidence, because auditors and assessors often evaluate whether exceptions are controlled and justified. When exception roles are clear, exceptions become a controlled release valve rather than a silent program failure. This is one of the clearest places where governance creates stability. As we close, assigning roles and responsibilities is about turning compliance from a concept into an operating system with clear ownership, predictable cadence, and defensible evidence. Roles are defined by authority and accountability, not just by job titles, and ownership is essential because unowned tasks become neglected tasks. A mature program assigns responsibilities across requirement interpretation, control design, control operation, evidence management, assurance, and exception handling, so no critical activity is left floating. System owners anchor system-level accountability. Data owners anchor data handling and privacy accountability. Compliance functions coordinate requirements and evidence. Security functions provide control expertise and assurance. Privacy roles govern appropriate data use. And operational roles execute the daily work that makes controls real. Clear separation between responsibility and accountability prevents bottlenecks and creates a realistic distribution of work. Exception management demonstrates integrity because it creates a controlled process for handling reality without pretending requirements are optional. If you can picture who owns what, who decides, who does, and how proof is produced, you have a core CG/C skill that prevents hidden scope, reduces audit panic, and keeps compliance steady over time.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.